Cool, cool. So we are going to go over cerebrospinal fluid findings. This comes up all over the CSF, all over the step two practice questions, as well as step one practice questions. A lot of the times, these step two ones like to go for kind of newer twists. So first things that I like to do when I come across these CSF questions, it's worked well for me, is just look at the percentage breakdown on your leukocyte count. Obviously, so you start with those neutrophils and lymphocytes and figure out which way you're going to go. I'm sure a lot of people have probably done that with success on step one. Of course, for step two, they like to try and find those wrinkles. So, as an aside, one of the other fun wrinkles that's a lot like this is pertussis. Bordetella pertussis presents with a high lymphocyte count when you're infected systemically. Um, and that doesn't make any sense following conventional rules because you would have expected it to be a high neutrophil count. Well, the emphasis of my discussion for this club is kind of a similar thing. If you have lymphocytes at 80% and neutrophils at 20%, you'd expect it to be a viral cause. But what if you were to juxtapose that with having a low glucose? Well, that doesn't really make any sense either, because typically we just think of bacteria eating up the glucose and viruses not doing that. So if you have a low glucose and a high lymphocyte count with no red blood cells, which is a plus or minus for like an HSV, you might want to consider tuberculosis being the actual cause. Because tuberculosis, when it causes meningitis, has the low glucose that we expect, a high protein, and a high white blood cell count, but that is lymphocytic in nature, as opposed to all of our other bacterials. Another CSF finding that they throw in a little bit more on step two, in my opinion, compared to step one, is GBS, so Guillain-Barré. For this one, what ends up happening is you have a low leukocyte count, which, again, okay, it's a bacteria that starts this entire process, but it's not really a bacteria that's in the CSF. It's an autoimmune process secondary to our Campylobacter jejuni infection. So you have the normal glucose, the normal white count. What ends up happening in GBS that's kind of supposed to be, or at least for test taking purposes, giveaway, is that the protein is just going to go nuts. So really, if the protein's gone above, we'll say 300, your only real options at that point are going to be a bacteria, tuberculosis, or GBS. But if it goes above 500, like if it goes above like 5 or 600, really, then you really should be locking in on GBS, because GBS is really the only one that's necessarily known for going truly haywire. Okay, so if the only reason that you tuned in right now is just to listen to a little bit about cerebrospinal fluid, and as that pertains to questions on step two, you could hop off, because I'm just going to cover two other quick things that I've seen come up a couple different times that tend to trip me up, at least. So for one of them is a motor vehicle crash, and how it's important not to forget the silly little nexus criteria. So I'm sure that the nexus criteria is something that people who are going into emergency medicine or radiology just go crazy for. But just as a reminder, things like being really drunk or not really understanding where they are, so just being confused. If they reported spinal tenderness, I don't know if that necessarily needs to be in the nexus criteria. I guess it's there, but that's not really something people forget about. Neurologic deficit. These are all things that maybe you would have been thinking, okay, yeah, maybe I should get imaging of like the cervical spine. I mean, that kind of makes sense. We're having these types of issues. You might be thinking MRI of the brain, CT is fine. Not really all that terribly crazy. But another thing that keep in mind is even at high speed injuries, be it like parachuting, we're getting these military questions now. So let's say they were in a tank or a Jeep that was going and it crashed. Okay. Those types of people would technically also be indicated for getting a CT of their cervical spine. Um, and that's has, that's just kind of following the nexus criteria. Okay. So the last thing I'm going to go over is one of everybody's favorite topics, pregnancy and the bizarre normal findings of it. Okay, so the normal finding that I'm going to go over today is a female who's pregnant. It's not even her first time necessarily being pregnant, and she starts having these weird, like masculine, like type of features happening. So we'll say that she's got hair growth and um, acne, acne. So just these things that are like, okay, man, what's going on? Like, do I have testosterone secreting tumor or something? So then you get this imaging of her abdomen, and you find out that she's got these huge masses bilaterally. Okay, we'll say they're even like 6.5 centimeters, 6.5 centimeters in size of it, but they're bilateral. And for women with bilateral non complex cysts, most of the time it's going to be something a little bit more benign. So, in somebody who's not pregnant, a really common one that comes up is theca lutein cysts. Those ones are bilateral and they're not going to have like complex septations. They might even get pretty big, but those are considered benign. In pregnancy, they really like to also do these fun things called luteomas of pregnancy. And these might even regress after pregnancy, which kind of like when they talk about carpal tunnel syndrome during pregnancy, a lot of the times the questions will be like, what's the best course of action? It'll be like wrist splints. Most OBs probably aren't super optimistic about how much wrist splints could help, but um, in any case, the definitive management for, or the expected definitive management for carpal tunnel syndrome in pregnancy would be to, deliver the baby. And that type of thing usually tends to get better on its own. All right. Thanks for tuning in. Keep an eye out for the next one.